Welcome back. Mark 2:13, and he went out back. Looks like he went back, or he went out again. Paraten thalassam, beside the sea. Kai pass ho oklos, and the whole crowd. This is a phrase we'll start to see. Erikator was going to him. Kai edidaskenautus, and he was teaching them. The reason I flag up these words, I haven't said this, it's kind of, for me, it's all about, there are so many different kinds of cloth in this gospel that it's nice to be able to say, this is the same kind of cloth as that. And that's why I flag up these language things. And to be honest, that's the main reason you read Mark with the Greek rather than just King James version. Okay. There's a lot going on in this chapter. It's an untidy and odd mix. Okay. And as he passed by Kaparagon, as he was passing by, Aden, he saw Levi, Totu Alphaiu, the son of Alphaeus, Cathermenon, sitting epitotelonion at the tax booth. And he says to him, we see this a lot, Akoluthe moi, follow me. And there's one of these keywords, having risen, he followed him. I don't know what a tax booth looks like. I would like to, because one of the things I explore is an iconotropic interpretation. I think about what something would look like as a picture if it was a mural inside a temple, and then try to interpret, try to see what the picture was really about that was misinterpreted. But I won't go into that now. Why a tax collector needs a booth? Alphaeus, son of Alphaeus. That's very odd. It's actually not Alphaeus. It's Halphaios. In all the cases it occurs. So it's probably le f. So that's why it's often thought to be the same as Klopas or Cleopas, because there's that le p. It's odd. It's odd, and I can't say at this time even why this is important. Okay. Kai-genitai. Yes. Present tense this time, not kai-genito. And it happens. Catechase thy out on. That I think it happened that he was lying ente or ki autu in his house. It actually says in his house. I'm starting to see a difference between oikos and oikia. I'll come back to this. And many tax collectors and sinners, poloi telonai ke hamartoloi, sun anekento, were reclining or taking supper with Jesus and with his disciples, for they were many and they were following him. It sounds to me like there are many tax collectors and sinners following him. I get the feeling that this is very cooked. Do you remember in the last chapter we saw Jesus heal Peter's mother-in-law? And I said, otherwise we wouldn't have known that the disciples had wives and probably children and houses, were it not for the fact that this guy has a mother-in-law. And in a sense, I suspect we're looking at something that normalizes normalizes a Jesus movement. And here we learn that Jesus had a house, which is kind of news to me and rather counterintuitive from the style we normally see him in. And this seems very Greco-Roman. Incidentally, when you see verbs with double prefixes, I consider that very late and very kind of Hellenized or Romanized as well. It is quite common. This looks like a Greco-Roman symposium, and there are tax collectors for the Romans, and who sinners are we don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're Romans. But it's very middle class compared to what we see elsewhere of Jesus. Okay, and the scribes and the Pharisees, having seen that he is eating with sinners and tax collectors, they were saying, or they started to say to his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Incidentally, this structure also pairs well. Just listen to the triple repetition of this. Many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus, and the scribes and the Pharisees, when they saw that many tax collectors and sinners were dining with Jesus, they say, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? So we've got it 3 times. And we had that. It's a very long-winded way. Essentially, you could have told that story in half as many words or less. And we had the same a little bit before. Yes, about the questioning. Yes. Some of the scribes were sitting there questioning their hearts, and Jesus, perceiving that the scribes were questioning within themselves, he said, why do you question these things in your hearts? I don't know what the significance of this is, but we've got the same pattern, rather stretching it out long. Okay, sorry, I'll go back to where I was. Yeah, okay. So why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus, having heard this, says to them that hoi squantes, those who are strong or those who are well, do not have need of a healer, but those who are ill. I did not come to call the just, but to call sinners. I did not come to call the just, but to call sinners. This word's worth flagging up. It always reminds me of James, or perhaps certain cults may be associated with Qumran, but it seems to be a kind of key word. The teacher of righteousness, you may have heard of. That's in the same line, the same general area. Sadikim. Anyway, I came not to call the just, but to call sinners. Right. Incidentally, one way of seeing this is always one way of seeing disputes in gospel texts is disputes between the community that this text is serving and communities which are close, perhaps even similar, and share a kind of common ancestor, but are doing something slightly different. And as we have, all of our texts have gone through many stages of revisions, and they've served many different communities on the way. It's kind of difficult for us to be concrete. But here he's saying, I'm not here for the just, I'm here for sinners. And Christians could say, well, that's simply, we stop being interested in the Jews and we're mostly interested in Gentiles, people who don't do observance. But it's not just the Pharisees we're talking about. Sometimes that's a distinction, Christians versus Pharisees. But John's disciples are on the same side as the Pharisees here. The next bit's about fasting. And there were the disciples of John and the Pharisees fasting, nes duantes. And they come and they say to him, I'm not sure who they is, people come and they say to him, why do the disciples of John and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Well, what do we mean by fasting? It's completely unclear. Nobody mentions wine. I think one text does. Yeah. I mean, when you fast is important, and different groups fasting at different times, or having different calendars and celebrating different holy days, tread on each other's toes, as you probably know. Christians, what we know of Gentile Christians, I'm guessing they don't fast. I'm guessing fasting was a Jewish thing, and by the time you've got Greco-Romans on board, they're maybe not interested in fasting. If they're mainstream people who live in villages and houses and have wives, it's just a guess. As I say, there's something cooked about it. Kai penautois ho Jesus, and Jesus said to them, hoi hui tu non phonos, the sons of the bridal chamber, wedding guests, medunantai, can the wedding guests fast nes duain enhoi at the time when honumphios metauto nestin, the bridegroom is with them? Mer is a question, in fact, implying no, of course they can't. Yes. Can the wedding guests fast when the bridegroom is with them? Because of course it's a time of feasting, not fasting. For as long a time as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen this in the context of no. Yeah. Okay. Eleusontidae hemerai. The days will come when aparthe, this is iro again, taken away from him, when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast on that day. Yeah. Okay, and now we have a couple of sayings, and it's not 100% clear how they relate. They're such good sayings that they've become so much part of us, we don't see how strange they are. Okay. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. No one, epichrapte, sews. Epiblema, I think, is a kind of patch, yes, from ballo. Epiballo, to throw something onto something. A patch. Racus agnathu, yes, of cloth which is unshrunk, unlaundered. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth, asymation panion, on an old garment. Indeed. And if he does, iro, again, and pleroma is an odd word. The filling is pimplemi, can just mean filling. Filling, I guess we're saying tears from it. The filling rises from it, or lifts from it. I'm sorry, yes, the new from the old. Yes, the new from the old. And there comes about a worse tear. Well, this is kind of homespun wisdom, and definitely, if we're talking about comparing Jewish law with Christian practice, that's normally how it's interpreted when we're deciding that Christians don't have to observe all of the peculiar Jewish practices. You don't sew a piece of a new patch on an old garment. But we've got some funny words here. Pleroma is often the word used for particularly what we call Gnostic texts. That's a silly categorization. But the pleroma is sometimes used as the kind of area of heaven which is below God. In principle, under God, there was nothing but God. And then there's some kind of fall. And all of these entities called eons, which are kind of individual, populate this space, which is heavenly to us because obviously it's above us, but it's below God. And you probably remember Paul being taken up to the seventh heaven. I repeat, it is useful to think of to think of this world as kind of concentric circles, concentric spheres, one inside another, and it being very unusual for things to travel through, which is why, we have a hole here. Yes, we have a hole in a garment. Garments are often used for heaven, and we had a hole in the first story of the paralytic, a hole in the roof, perhaps the roof of heaven. Whether you find this significant, and schisma is a word we saw in chapter 1, the previous chapter. Uranus, schismenus, the heavens being opened or split. Am I making too much of this? Probably, but I'd just like to keep it in mind. Kai udes ballet oinon, neon, and no one throws new wine, asaskus palaius, into old wineskins. Edimer, if he does, hrek se hoinos, the wine will burst to taskus, the skins, and hoinos apolutai kai huiaskoi, and the wine will be destroyed and the wineskins. Ala oinon neon asaskus kainos, but put, presumably, or even so, put new wine into old wineskins. And again, this fits perfectly if you're thinking in terms of Christianity annulling the obligation for the Jewish law, and if you see that as the context of this chapter, then that will satisfy you. We have a wineskin being burst, we have a hole being patched with pleroma and schisms. Yeah. Okay. The next bit is at least ostensibly about Sabbath observance, which I imagine would have been a big thing if you think of a world which is Jews versus Christians. Jews obviously are strictly observing the Sabbath, which is Saturday. I don't know when the Christians start to observe Sunday, but anyway, they tend not to fast but to celebrate, and they're certainly not constrained by certain Sabbath observances, the distances you can go, and not doing anything that could be construed as work. But you know all this. Okay, here we are. This is more familiar. Kai agenitor. That's how I like. That's what I call a kind of primitive mark starting point. Kai genitor autoi centoi sabasin parapuesthai. That he was going across, maybe, on the Sabbath, diaton sporimone, through the grain fields, I think through the wheat fields, and his disciples, oh gosh, I would say began. Hodon poiein is an English idiom to make your way, but it's not a particularly Greek or gospel idiom. It seems odd to me, but that's what it says. I'm going to translate it: began to make their way, or to make a path, perhaps. And as they made a path, they were telontes to stakwas. They were plucking the heads of grain, making a path. Remember in the previous chapter, but one, yes, hodos is always a key word, but there is this Malachi prophecy: make a way through the wilderness. And they are actually, like Theresa May, making a path. I've walked through a wheat field and done that. You will annoy farmers, but you do sort of make a path through the wheat fields. I don't know if that's what's intended. Yeah, okay. Kai hoi Pharisaioi elegon autoi, and the Pharisees were saying to him, Ide, look, tipoiusin toi sabasin ho ukexestin. Why are they doing on the Sabbath what is not lawful? Yes. Exesti is a very common word, especially in the Gospels. It is permitted, it's allowed. And exousia, authority. Licet would be the Latin. What's not licit? Why are they doing what's not licit on the Sabbath? Well, it could be the distance of the walk, but it seems to be more that they are doing work by plucking heads of grain. I have an interpretation of this whereby it starts out as an icon, and if it is an icon, then it's possible that this represents the eschatological harvest, the end of the world, and maybe the figures are not disciples but angels. It's entirely possible. Yeah, but it makes perfect sense in a Jews versus Christians context, I guess. Okay, so the answer is about Sabbath observance. Okay. Gosh, this is such a rabbit hole. I won't manage to go into all of this today, but it's a rabbit hole. And he says to them, Udepita anagnoter, have you never read aloud? We use this word for reading aloud in synagogue. Have you never read aloud what David did when he was having need and he was hungry and those with him? Right. How he entered into the house of God, epi Abiathar archieros, when Abiathar was high priest. Kai tusatus tes protheseos ephagen, and he ate the loaves of the presence, which it is not permissible to eat except for the priests. And he also gave them to those who were with him. Right. So the connection is, it's about wheat. That's the connection between the walking through wheat fields and this story. And the Sabbath, it's all to do with whether something is licit, whether something is holy or profane. Right. And he was saying to them, the Sabbath came about for man, and not man for the Sabbath, which is something of a Christian mantra. Yeah. The Sabbath was made for man, not made for the Sabbath. And in essence, all Jewish law and commandments fall into that category as well, that they were made for man and not man for them. So, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Well, you could certainly interpret that in an eschatological way, Lord of the Sabbath. I mean, we saw him in the previous book. The Messiah has this eschatological function. Okay, I'm not going to dwell on this now, but this makes perfect sense until you really read around. It's actually 1 Samuel 21. Yeah, I'll come back to that. Okay, Abiathar was not the high priest in this story. The high priest was his father Ahimelech, and David was on the run from Saul. And you might think that this is at the temple, but of course you would know that in the time of David there was no temple. Actually, this is in the time when Saul was king, and there is no temple. So there is bread of the presence. Is that because the Ark of the Covenant is there? I'm not sure. It certainly doesn't say so. It's in a place called Nob, where everyone's a priest. All the men are priests. And the story of what David's doing there is very confused. The Hebrew makes very little sense, and the Greek Septuagint has a different version, which also makes very little sense. And there are various translations which attempt to give it sense. But anyway, it's a very interesting story. I urge you to go to it. And actually, David doesn't give it to those who are with him, but he asks for bread to take to some young men who he's meeting. And the implication is that the young men he's meeting will be associates who will help him in his rebellion. And I'll tell you a story briefly. He's really pulling a fast one on the priest, Ahimelech. Ahimelech the priest. He says, "Why are you here and no one is with you?" Ahimelech is startled and trembling. He sees that something's wrong. It's David kind of blags and pretends to be there on Saul's business. Yeah, there's so many odd little things in here. I don't think Ahimelech believes him. The king gave me a command today. He said, let no one know the matter on which I send you, concerning which I've charged you. Yes. So he pretends to be on secret business for the king. And gosh, the Greek has this. The Greek Septuagint has. I'll read you the translation. I can't tell you the matter on which I'm sent, but I've made an appointment with my servants, with some young men, to be in a place called the Faithfulness of God, Philani Maimoni, or Philani Alomni. That's not there. It's actually a garbling of the Hebrew. Al to Makom Peloni. Okay, the Peloni is there, and that's a bit garbled. It just means to a certain place. And why the Greek text has, and I've made an agreement to meet with young men in the place which is called Pistis Theou, faith of God, Felani Alimony. Now, it's very odd. I wouldn't be surprised if that actually did mean something in another language, but it certainly doesn't mean anything in Hebrew. And where the Septuagint gets this detail, the faith of God, faithfulness of God, it's very odd. Okay, and this will set your ears on fire. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever is here. David asks for 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you can find, I think is the implication from the Hebrew and the Greek. Now, if you look about the loaves of the presence, it will tell you that it's in the temple of Jerusalem, and that there are 12 loaves, one for each of the tribes. And why David requests 5 loaves, there's no particular reason. So immediately it makes my ears prick up and makes me think of the feeding of 5,000, where we start with 5 loaves and then we end up with 12 baskets. And the fact that these loaves are illicit, essentially David is possibly pulling a fast one. He's certainly doing something which seems to be illicit, and he may be doing something also which is underhand. The priest answered David, I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread. Okay, if the young men have kept themselves from women. Oh gosh, yes. Yes, if the young men have kept themselves from women, they can eat. And this doesn't make sense in Hebrew or in the Greek. David answered the priest, truly women have been kept from us always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy. Not sure what the vessels represent. Even when it is an ordinary journey, how much more today will their vessels be holy? That is a gloss. That is a gloss. It's much less intelligible than that. I suspected that in order to eat they shouldn't be eating the shewbread anyway. But I guess this is before the temple, and the priest knows what he's doing. But the priest wants to ensure that young men are holy, and by that he means they haven't been in contact with women. I suspect their vessels may be their bodies or just their penises. That they haven't slept with a woman for... actually, the Greek specifies 3 days. Yesterday and for 3 days. The Hebrew suggests that just means always. Yeah, but this is the odd bit. So, when it came out on the road, all the young men were purified. But, the road itself is impure. The road is profane. It's odd that we were just talking about the disciples of John, and here we have a phrase which says, Her hodos bebelos, the road is profane. It's odd. The disciples are making a road through this grain field which is profane. What on earth does this mean? Yes, but today my vessels It, but today it will be purified through my vessels. What these vessels are, whether they're sexual organs or whether they are perhaps cooking pots. Maybe that if you had cooking pots you would have women, I don't know. It's often weapons, and that's how it's interpreted I like this one which is used in the Orthodox Church. And David answered to the priest and said to him, yes, even from a woman we have been at a distance from yesterday and the third day before. So on the one hand we have been pure for 3 days. In my coming forth for the journey everyone was purified, but the journey is profane. Obviously coming onto the road itself is polluting in itself. For today it should be sanctified on account of my weapons. So he's saying, well, we kind of were pure, but then we're not. Or it could be some people have the expedition is unclean because what David's doing is actually illicit. Essentially he's plotting, he's fleeing from Saul, and he's meeting up with confederates to mount a rebellion. I think that's clearly implied. And the Orthodox Church has this, but it's made holy on account of my weapons. Okay, so the fact that I'm armed means you can judge whether it's holy, but I have the power. In essence, he's saying, I have to kill you? That's at least one interpretation of it. And the priest gave him the holy bread, for there's no bread there but the bread of the presence. Bread of the presence is sometimes the bread of the face, hapanim of God. So sometimes it's prosopu and sometimes it's prothesios, which is removed from the law to replace by hot bread on the day it's taken away. And Abimelech the priest gave him the shewbread. I'm sorry. It's a rabbit hole. It really is a rabbit hole. The thing that concerns people most is this: Epi Abiathar Archeros, because we think that Abiathar was the high priest, and in fact he wasn't. Ahimelech, his father, was the high priest. What happens as a kind of sequel to this story is that somebody sees this happening. Incidentally, David first of all gets the 5 loaves, or however many there are. It doesn't specify there were 5. And then he asks for weapons, and the priest gives him a sword wrapped in a linen cloth, and it was the sword that Goliath had before David slew him. And this kind of looks forward. David said, that will do, there's nothing like it. And in fact David is going to go and join the Philistines to rebel against Saul. So there's that. I mean, it's certainly very illicit. There's a kind of David as a Promethean figure, in that he's stealing what's divine and giving to those who are profane, and he's also a kind of trickster. I think that's implied, that there's a trick or deceitfulness to the way he handles this. But yeah, this, you know what, I'm sorry I'm rambling. What worries people is that this is clearly a mistake. Just as in the previous chapter we had a mistake where it says in the prophet Isaiah, and it's not in Isaiah, it's in Malachi. Here we have a story told about a high priest, and it wasn't Abiathar, it was Ahimelech. Abiathar is his son. Saul heard about this betrayal, and he took revenge on Ahimelech and on the whole of the city of Nob, a city full of priests, by killing everybody. And the only escapee was Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, and he goes on to be a high priest. We often see him with Zadok carrying the Ark of the Covenant. But what worries scholars and Christians is, how did they not know? How did they not know the Bible? How can you make these mistakes? Because Jews are so strict, and now, of course, texts are so available, and we don't make these kind of mistakes. I actually I don't have an answer for that at this time, and I'm sorry I've rambled. By all means, go back and use your step and investigate this fully. There are so many ways that this seems to link up with other things. Go on, I will just say one thing. Sometimes when citations are made from the Old Testament, either a direct quotation or a story, it's possible that there's a missing link. So it's not always the words that we're given, and it's not always, if we went back to the Old Testament and read around the context, that we would get the point. But it's possible that some of these things have been collected together in a pesha, and so something else will have happened, another kind of historical, quasi-historic event that have fulfilled something from the Old Testament. And it's from this fulfillment that the narrative is created, but we're only directly referred to the Old Testament text. In other words, it's possible that this story had a special significance which is not clear here, and that's why it's in this gospel. But just what we have kind of makes sense, although it does bother people that either Jesus doesn't know his Torah, or that Mark didn't know his Torah, or somebody in between. No, not the Torah. It's from 1 Samuel. You know what? I'm going to stop there.